Well, they're billing this as a meeting rather than a hearing, and in fact they claim that it will not be recorded as a hearing. So there's only one hearing for the whole state for this massive new wrinkle in the industry, namely enabling the build-out of more fracking faster by enabling the distribution of another form of the gas and storage of the gas.
Right.
Yeah, so another point is that since we only have one hearing, we should treat this as an additional hearing. We should not ask questions because we give the DEC the chance to assure everyone this is completely safe technology.
Yeah, but is this being recorded? Is it being recorded?
They are not recording it. That's
okay,
true.
But the fact that it's going on matters, whether it's officially recorded or not.
Yeah, and we should be commenting to the people here as well as to the DEC.
Okay.
Being so patient. Good afternoon. Welcome to this public information session regarding proposed 6 New York Code of Rules and Regulations, Part 570, regulations on the liquefied natural gas facilities. This is an information session to provide citizens with the best information possible to understand the proposed regulations, everything possible about the proposed regulations, and also then to provide the best comments back to the Department of Environmental Conservation regarding those comments. My name is Carl Berger. I'm the Chief of the Bureau of Public Outreach at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation in Albany. To provide the presentations today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Andrew English, professional engineer, who is the Director of the Bureau of Technical Support at the Department of Environmental Conservation, Russ Brogsy, professional engineer, who is also in the Bureau of Technical Support in the Division of Environmental Remediation, and our Associate Attorney, David Keene, who is the counsel working on the regulations. Today's information session is just that, an information session. Staff will provide a briefing, information, PowerPoint presentation regarding the regulations. There will be frequent breaks for questions and answers. We do ask that participants do either go to the mics or stand up and do ask one question at a time, and they'll be taken in the order that people do get up or ask them, and we'll work our way through that way. If you do desire to participate in on October 30th, there will be another public information session similar to this one from 10 o'clock until 12 o'clock at 625 Broadway, the DEC headquarters in Albany, New York. Following that, at 2 p.m., there will be a public hearing at which comments will be read, oral comments will be read into the record regarding this. The comment period regarding the regulations is open until November 4th, 2013, and comments are accepted through electronic submission, through paper, mailed or delivered to 625 Broadway, or at the aforementioned hearing at 625 Broadway on October 30th. We do have a sheet at the side table here that does provide all of the ways that you can make your comments, and also directs you to information on the department's website regarding the regulations. So then, without further ado, I will turn the mic over to Russ Brogsy, who will begin the presentation regarding the regulations. Thank you all for coming. Thanks, Russ.
Thanks, Carl. Not sure why this is there we go. We just finished the welcome introductions. So let me walk you through the agenda for today. We're going to talk about the history of the regulations, the law, the background behind it. We're going to talk a little bit about a couple of reports that have come out, Copies of the reports are available on the website. We have a couple of copies over on the table if you're interested. At that point, we're going to take a break. We're going to take question and answers, and we'll talk about the background a little bit and see what any questions you have. And then we're going to go into the actual regulations themselves, and we're going to take frequent breaks through the regulations at bite-sized chunks so that we can take any questions that you might have as we go along. As Carl mentioned, this is just an informal information period. This is not a hearing. This is not where you get to make formal comments. This is just trying to provide information to everyone so they understand the regulations in order to make better comments to us. All right, so where did we all begin? So that's one of the things that people typically like to know. Why did the law get passed? 1973, there was an accident that occurred. It was a tragic accident that involved the maintenance of a tank. And there was people inside the tank, it was an empty tank, and there was a fire that happened, and there were 40 people that ended up losing their life. So there is a background for why this thing happened. There were 40 people inside the tank that ended up losing their life. A couple of things that came out over time that you need to understand. One, this was not an LNG explosion. This was not an LNG accident. It was an LNG tank that was empty. There were people inside it. There was maintenance going on. If the tank had been in operation, there was LNG in it, nobody would have been inside the tank, and there wouldn't have been this type of accident. So in 1973, this accident happened. 1976, the legislature, looking at the situation, said, we think this needs to be regulated. And so 1976, they passed a law, the CL, Environmental Conservation Law, was added that said the department should go forward and create regulations for LNG storage. 1978 came. 1978, the legislature said, you know, we're not sure about some of this stuff. We're not going to wait for the department to create regulations. We're going to just pass a statewide moratorium, and there can't be any more LNG, period. Minus there are 3 grandfathered facilities, and we'll talk about those later. But they stopped and said, we don't want LNG, 1978. That went on that way until 1997. 1997, through different stuff going on, the legislature said, you know, we think we need better information. And so they commissioned a study, 1997 law through the Energy Board, to evaluate what is going on with LNG. So a board was put together, a committee. It was a combination of public and private representatives, tried to be well balanced, tried to understand what is going on. They had a couple of things that they were required to do in that report. One was to examine the existing law and the situation regarding LNG. Take another look at other states. What's going on with LNG elsewhere? What is going on? What is the state? And the bottom line, they had to come back at the end of that report and make some recommendations to the legislature on what they should do concerning LNG. In 1998, this board put out the report, and they came out with several important things. One, they determined that LNG has safety similar to any other motor fuel. So gasoline, diesel, LNG, they're all fuels, and stored properly, they have similar type of safety issues. Accident that occurred back in 1973, they took a look at and said, you know what, it really was an empty tank. There wasn't LNG. It was not an LNG storage accident. It was a maintenance accident that happened because people had problems doing the work. They took a look around and they found out that no other state anywhere prohibited LNG storage or usage. Taking a look at the positive side, they saw some opportunities, that there could be opportunities for cleaner fuel. And the bottom line, they came back to the legislature and said, we want to recommendation to discontinue the moratorium and repeal the law entirely, allow LNG to go forward. So, 1999, the legislature took action on that report. They didn't adopt everything that the report recommended. Instead of lifting the moratorium statewide, they said, let's do it just upstate. Leave the moratorium in effect in New York City. Instead of repealing the entire law, they did. And they said the law stands, the department should move forward and draft regulations to deal with that. So at that point in time, 1999, 2000, the department started looking at drafting the regulations for LNG. As we began that process of developing the regulations, we found that there were some certain problems that were within the law. The law was written back in 1976 and wasn't addressing all of the issues that we wanted to address. In particular, there are a couple of issues that are in the law that were problematic. One is dealing with routing of interstate or intrastate transportation of LNG. Now let's talk for a quick moment. We'll get into some details later, but making sure we understand the difference between interstate and intrastate. Intrastate means within, transportation occurring within New York State. Interstate being transportation that occurs across state boundaries. So it's coming in from out of state or going out of state. We'll get into that definition, but making sure you understand the difference there. The law required DOT to take the process of certifying any route that occurred intrastate. DOT took a look at that and they said a couple of things. We do not do route certification for any hazardous material, not for hazardous waste, nuclear, nothing. DOT does not do route certification. And therefore they determined that it would not really be practicable to do routing for just LNG. So they said, that's not where we are, that's not what we're doing, we don't have regulations. We don't do interstate route certification. Part of it is a moot point because in reality, even if they did, there is no production facility inside New York State that they would have to do route certification for. There isn't a supply inside New York State to supply these facilities. The other part that was in the law that was somewhat troubling for us, an impediment for us moving forward, was the aspect that we needed to evaluate local fire response capabilities. As we took a look at that, we said, we're not going to be expert firefighters in understanding how and equipment and capabilities the fire response personnel need to have. However, we have a state office, the Department of State Office of Fire Prevention and Control, that does deal with that exact issue. And so we've contacted them and we're going to be getting input from them as we go through that process. As we were going through the process, developing these regulations, right around 2008, we actually had a request from the governor's office that we take a step back, we take another look at the regulations, take a look at safety issues, take a look at a variety of issues. And so in 2008, we began that process working with NYSDEC to take a look at the process of the regulations themselves. 2011, we actually came out with the next report that tried to help us understand the various aspects of LNG. A couple of things that we were taking a look at. One, we wanted them to evaluate state-of-the-art for regulating LNG inside the United States. What type of laws and regulations were in place in other states and other localities. What was being dealt with for safety, security, transportation, location of facilities. what do these things take a look at? The other aspect that we asked NYSDEC to develop in this report was to take a look at what are the projections, what are the number and types of facilities that could be expected, the types of jobs, the costs, those type of things. So 2011, after a couple of years of work with NYSDEC, this report came out, and we found a couple more things that are interesting. One, we found out that New York is the only state that has a moratorium still on LNG and doesn't allow LNG. The other states, they allow it and they rely upon building and fire codes. Interesting thing is if our law did not exist, the New York State Fire Code actually references the same exact standards that all of the other states reference, and there would be basically equality with other states if our program didn't even exist. A couple other things that we heard and saw, there were a couple of differences across the United States. For example, Texas actually licensed the operators for these facilities. There's a couple other nuances in a couple other states. Big thing, as we took a look at the projected number of facilities and types of facilities, was that there's going to be approximately 21 facilities over the next 5 years, thereabouts, based on the types of uses that would be out there. Those would all be related to transportation type facilities. We'll talk about some of the recent developments in a moment. And basically because there's not that large number of facilities, there would not necessarily be a large regulatory cost involved. So that brings us to recent developments. We've worked through the past. We've worked through some different reports and issues. What's going on now? Why are we moving forward with the regulations? One of the things that has come to light and where we've heard from various organizations is the price differential between petroleum, diesel fuel, and natural gas. There is a high cost for diesel and a lower cost for natural gas, and a lot of trucking facilities would be interested in moving to LNG for their trucking fuel. Go with that, there's more advanced engines, so there's even being more economy that's being developed. Some reduced emissions profiles compared to diesel. Basically, as we're looking across the United States, we're seeing the economic demand for facilities and people wanting to see those facilities come to New York so that they can complete their trucking routes. As we took a look across the United States, right now there's about 150 stations either already in operation or well underway for being planned and put into place. So it's not like New York is on the cutting edge. We're actually well behind and trailing some of this technology. So as we start moving forward with the regulations, we then had to address those impediments that we talked about. So we found out that things can be done safely, we can work through these issues. How do we deal with the impediments that were there? First one's the routing requirement. And while the law is still the law, and it still requires that if somebody's going to transport LNG just within New York State, there would have to be a route certified. And so we went ahead and put that in there. DOT is going to have to do route certification if they're going to have transportation just within New York State. Local emergency response evaluation. We did two things to address this particular impediment. First, as somebody puts together a permit application, they're going to be required to do an evaluation of the locality and find out what their capabilities are, what their equipment is, what their training is, how are they going to have response to any emergency that would require their response. And we don't want to be the ones just to evaluate that to make sure that that has been done correctly. So again, we're working with the Office of Fire Prevention and Control to take a look at that report, part of that permit application, make sure it's correct, make sure that if there's any recommendations coming out of there, that those are indeed accurate and able to be implemented. So this is our first break. We've just taken you through the background to the law itself and the fact that there was an accident, taking a look at the various factors that have brought us to this particular point. Let's stop at this point and take any questions.
Yeah, question.